Cold Brew and the crew. Crew. Crew.
This is Cold Brew and the Crew, episode 5, with your hosts, Logan Taylor, Travis Marley, and our special guest, Ridge and R. What's going on, Ridge?
Not much, man. How are you doing?
Doing well. I'm doing well. Travis, what do you got for us?
Well, we are live with Ridgenar on brewing beer. He's been doing for how long, Ridge?
I've been brewing for about just over 5 years.
5 years. And can you tell us how you got into it?
My brother and my cousin brewed, and I hung out with them a couple of times while they're doing it. You know, it's kind of a fun thing to do. You go over, drink some beer, brew some beer, and I don't know. It just seemed like a hobby that I should try. I figured it couldn't hurt. Just try it once. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't do it anymore. But, you know, worst case scenario, I end up with 5 gallons of beer. So I gave it a shot, and I enjoyed it. It's fun. And, you know, it's really a thing that I like to share with people, because I'm not going to drink 5 gallons of beer myself usually, at least not as fast as I'd want to replace the beer that I made. So I just share it with other people. And then through that, I've gotten a bunch of other people into brewing too.
Now, was the first couple beers that you made, were they kind of rough?
Yeah. So, you know, when you first start, typically you don't want to put in too much money, right? So you maybe don't buy a piece of equipment that might be helpful, or you don't buy, the more complex ways you can make beer. So when you first start making beer, typically you make what's called an extract beer. And that basically, you know, when you brew beer, you need sugar and you need to extract that from grain. Well, you can buy that already done. Typically your beer doesn't turn out quite as good. So if you start like that, like I did, you end up with a beer that's not as good. And then also you don't tend to kind of know what you like. So my first beer specifically, I made an Irish red, and I made it an extract. You know, that's sort of the cheaper way to go. And I don't really like Irish reds. I don't know what I was thinking. Say that again.
I like Irish red. I would drink it.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up drinking it, but I shared most of it. And then, you know, like I said, I made it a cheaper way. So yeah, the first few beers I made, because I didn't really know what I was doing, they were a bit rough, but they were drinkable. Like, you know, one thing I always tell people is, like, you're gonna make beer if you follow the steps generally. Like, you're not gonna screw that part up. It just may not be the best thing you ever had.
Now, when you say you made it a cheaper way back then, like, what do you do now?
Right. So, like I was saying, the main thing, the two different ways you can make beer as a home brewer is you can get that extract just pre-done. It basically just looks like syrup. You mix that in with water, you boil that, add your hops throughout, you know, whatever, and then that's your source of sugar. Which, in order to make beer, of course, you need to add yeast, which eats sugar and makes alcohol. So that's what I did before. I would just basically buy the syrup. And looks like we lost Barry. Now, what I do is I extract that sugar myself. I soak grain in water, and it just requires another piece of equipment. It's called a mash tun. Basically, it's just where you kind of make oatmeal more or less, and then you extract the liquid from that. And depending on how long you did it and what the temperature was, you get a certain degree of sugar, and then you use that. And that allows you to make things like this, which you could see like it's a light colored beer. Or, you know, you get to control it a lot more. If you make like a stout, for example, it's supposed to be kind of thick. Well, if you use that extract, that syrup, you don't really get to control that. It is what it is. And then also every beer you get looks orange. It's just the way it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Now, when you're going into, like, give what your game plan is. Does it you study a certain beer you want to make for weeks at a time to figure out exactly what you want, and then go to like the step-by-step process, and like how long it takes?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing you got to do, of course, is figure out like what beer you want to make, like what style. So do you want to just make an IPA, or do you want to make a stout? And, you know, the process is almost always the same, or at least super similar. No matter what kind of beer you make. If you're making an ale, so like, you know, an IPA or a pale ale, or a porter or a stout. Those are all ales. The process is pretty much the same, but usually I spend a good amount of time researching like what yeast will give me like desirable results for the beer that I want, and then also how much and which hops that I want to add and when, because all of those things will could really change the way the beer tastes at the end. So I spend a lot of time with that, the hops and the yeast and the grain, I guess, more so than I spend thinking about the game plan, because the game plan is usually about the same.
Okay.
I'll jump in here. So what do you use to make the beer?
Like the equipment wise?
Yes.
So I have a 10-gallon kettle, stainless steel that has like a thermometer and like a spigot on it. Mm-hmm. And then I use, I guess it's made for beer, but it's essentially a turkey burner. So I could just, in my garage, that's my source of heat. And then I have what I was saying earlier is called a mash tun. So a mash tun, my mash tun is a cooler. It's like a blue, the blue and white Coleman cooler, like you can buy it for like $15. Yep. I bought one of those, and the reason for that is because not only does a cooler keep something cold, it'll also keep stuff hot. It'll just keep temperature, and that's really important. So I use that, and then I also bought another sort of a spigot that I put on there. And then I have a wort chiller. So it's like a copper coil that I run water through to help cool down the beer when I get to that stage. A thermometer, and then a couple of fermenting buckets. That's equipment wise. That's it.
Nice. What would you say is your favorite part of brewing?
I would say, I mean, it's got to be like the first or second glass. And then also with that, the sharing of it, because there really, in my mind, there are two kinds of home brewer. There's the cook, and then there's like the scientist. I'm not the scientist. I'm 100% the cook. I take temperature, and that's important. I do some of the things where you like can calculate like how much alcohol is in it. I do some of that sometimes, but I don't care that much about that. What I care about is it beer, and does it taste good? So I the first or second glass is like, okay, here it is. I just spent a month making this thing. Did I waste my time, or is it good? And that's always pretty awesome. And then, especially when it turns out to be pretty good. And then the other part is just sharing it with people. Like I've sent a beer to somebody before, and it was, maybe them being nice, but they're like, oh, this is the best beer I've ever had. And that's a pretty good compliment, considering like you can go buy beer made with millions of dollars of equipment, and I'm using a cooler in my garage.
Right. Oh yeah, that's a huge compliment. Speaking of sharing, though, I mean, you have a certain limit of bottles of beer that you ship out, like, because it takes how long does it take? You said like 6 weeks, right?
I mean, it depends on the beer, but I mean, minimum, it's going to take you probably. You could probably make a decent beer in about 17 days, okay. like day one, and then can drink it about 17 days. But usually it takes a little longer.
Okay, I mean, so 17 days, month, whatever, it takes time nonetheless. And
yeah.
So does you kind of want to hold the beer, like you don't want to.
Oh yeah, you want to be dude. So selfish, absolutely. So, but like typically, I'll give out if somebody asks me for one and they really want one, I'll give them one. If someone's like, "Oh, give me a 6-pack," yeah, they can forget about it. But also now I keg my beer too, so it's actually really difficult to take beer places. I can still bottle that beer and it'll still be okay, but it'll never be as good as it is out of my keg. So sometimes I'm a bit wary of taking beers to people because it's not going to be the best version of it that it should be. But also, yeah, I mean, the volume thing, like you said, I mean, 5 gallons ends up about, about 50 beers, which sounds like a shitload for sure. But then, when you've got 10 people that want one, well, now you've got 40. And if you give them each 2, you start to run out, and then now you got to make another one. Usually if you make one beer at a time, the first beer does not last until the second beer is ready. Usually not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be hard for me if it took that long. Like I might give away a couple that I'd probably keep majority of it, unless that next beer gets finished before I finish all the first ones. And then after that, maybe I can off those.
Yeah.
Logan, you got anything to add to that?
Now, obviously, I mean, is it essential to keep like all the equipment clean as well? Like, is that a process in itself?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so typically if you go to a homebrew store, and maybe if you haven't bought anything before to, you're going to make your first beer and you go in there and talk to them, they're always super helpful. Like people that make beer, homebrewers, they want to talk about beer, they want to make beer, and they want to help you, and they'll give you their advice. It may not be the same as every other homebrewer. I say, like, if you ask 10 homebrewers the same question, you'll get 15 different answers. But yeah, so the cleaning part of it. So if you go in there, they're going to tell you to buy Star San. And Star San is just a cleaner that you mix with water, and that will kill basically anything and everything. So what you want to do is you want to surface clean everything, especially like the kettle and then the mash tun, because it's always going to have residual grain or hop dust or whatever on it. So you want to clean that for sure. And then the yeast is another thing. Those are some resilient fuckers. Those things will live. I mean, if you Google how like, first of all, yeast can like survive like on the moon. It's kind of crazy, but it also is very temperature intolerant depending on the specific degree. So really, really cold and obviously really, really hot will kill it. But it doesn't always. And that's really one of the main things you want to do is you want to try to get everything clean enough and then killed enough so that there's no wild yeast. With that said, though, I think a lot of homebrewers go over the top with it. I absolutely surface clean everything. I absolutely sanitize everything, but I don't freak out about it. A lot of people, especially when you start to ferment your beer, they'll say basically anything that goes into the beer after it's reached about 100 degrees, like when you start to cool it down, they'll say, oh, nothing can touch it unless it's been sanitized. Whatever. I will sanitize something, but they're like, hold it in the sanitizer for X amount of time. And like, I know that the science says that that's true, but no matter what you do, I mean, you could literally take a dump in your fermenter. You will make beer. That would be disgusting, but you would make beer. It will be beer. You can't, I mean, that's the thing. Like the yeast will eat the sugar. It will make alcohol. It will be beer. So, I mean, you want to make sure that you don't do anything too crazy. You don't want to throw mud in there, but if it looks surface clean and you sanitize it for, a couple of seconds, yeah, it's good, but it is totally a process. It's kind of the most annoying process, to be honest. I wish I could just use dirty equipment and it'd be so much easier.
Well, people, you heard it first on Cold Brew and the Crew. Yeast can live on the moon.
You might have heard it on, Google, but that's fine.
Now, did you go to like a beer school or anything, or did you just YouTube this shit, or like had a close buddy that kind of helped, like when you get into it, like how to learn all this stuff?
Yeah. And like I was saying earlier, my brother and my cousin both like brewed before me. When I made my first beer, my cousin came over and he kind of did everything. I mean, I kind of just like listened and whatever. If you buy a kit, like, which is usually what the first thing you'll do if you decide to homebrew, you'll buy a kit. It'll come with like a DVD usually, and it'll like tell you what to do. It's really low, like, it's really like high level, and it's not something that I follow. I've only watched it one time and I'm like, okay, fine. But yeah, I got most of what I know from those guys. And then just Googling and watching YouTube videos and stuff since then. And then also now that I've been doing it for so long, like I kind of do some of my own things as well. I mean, I don't know if I could call out anything specific that I do like different. But kind of like the sanitizing and the cleaning thing, like I clean it, I sanitize it, but I don't freak out. That's something that I've learned that it's not going to really make a big difference as long as it's clean. So, yeah, most of the stuff I know I learned probably through my cousin, and then after that, just trial and error.
Gotcha.
That's
What's your favorite beer so far you made?
My favorite beer. One of the things that's funny is like I kind of forget about them. I haven't made a ton, but I've probably made 30 beers, and it's hard to remember. I would say my favorite beer is probably I made a raspberry kettle sour. Basically, so there's a style called a Berliner, and a Berliner is like a mildly citrusy, sour, tangy beer. And then I added 5 pounds of raspberries to it before I kegged it. That's probably my favorite beer, and the reason for that is because kind of what I was saying earlier. One of my favorite parts is sharing it with people. People love that beer. I entered it into a homebrew competition at work. We do one every year, and although it's weird, I didn't win. But I mean, every person that came and tried it was like, "Holy shit! Like this is great." So that's probably my favorite beer that I made.
Now, you said competitions. Have you done many of those?
Yeah, well, I do the one at work every year, so I've done that 3 years. I won the first year, and then normally I end up winning best name. I spend a lot of time thinking about the names of the beers. It's actually probably one of my favorite parts. Like maybe just after like the tasting it the first time and sharing it with other people is probably is like naming it. I don't know why. Like it means nothing, but I just enjoy that part. And then I've entered the the Indiana State Fair. There's a homebrew a section of that. That competition is pretty stiff. I probably will never win anything, but it's pretty cool. It's $10 to enter your beer. You give them 3 12-ounce bottles, and then you basically get a mini beer festival and a 3-course meal. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, anybody that like wants to make a beer, just make a beer and enter it. You're probably not going to win anyway, but at least you get a beer festival and a meal for $10.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I tend to enter that. I haven't entered that in a couple of years, but just because I've just been busy around the time I needed to make it, so it would be prepared and ready for that.
What kind of beer did you? What type of beer did you make for that last festival?
The last one, which one? The like the big one, the Indiana one?
Yeah, the Indiana.
I made a smash IPA. So smash means single malt and single hop. And I used a malt called Maris Otter, which is like an English grain. And then I used Galaxy hops, which I want to say is an Australian hop, and it turned out pretty good. Sometimes it's hard to get like depth of flavor when you only use one of each. But it's just a style of beer, and I just hadn't made one yet, so I just made it and entered it, and I did okay. I did better than the first time I entered. Scores are out of 50. Like an amazing score is like a 39, and I think I got a 28. So like I got like a okay. Yeah.
Well, Rich, we appreciate you sitting in and give us some advice and your how to make beers, and
yeah,
I enjoy listening every time you talk about it.
Sometimes people don't know what they're getting into, and they ask me, they're like, "Hey, tell me about beer," and I'm like, "How much time do you have?"
This guy knows his shit. He helped me make a golden ale a couple summers ago, and it was awesome. Everybody loved it, and it probably lasted less than a week and a half because I got it out right after the fantasy football draft party, and so a lot of the guys were smashing on those. But,
yeah, that's the problem, man. Like I said, the beer literally lasted less time than it took us to make it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a pain. Yeah, that's when he's like, "Oh, can I have some of your beer?" I'm like, "You can have some."
Or Bud Light's sitting over here.
Mm-hmm.
Or you'd have the Bud Lights instead.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, they're like, "Can I have some beer?" I'm like, "Yeah, you can have that Bud Light." And they're like, "What about your beer?" I'm like, "It's gone." Like, you're just drinking one right now. It's gone. One thing I will say is that craft beer. I hate that phrase. I just so the world knows this, Bud Light is craft beer too, because the amount of precision that they have to use to make the same exact product, millions and millions of gallons at a time for 30 years, that's a fucking craft in my book. Anyway.
Also,
Hey, brother.
I got one more last thing for you, Ridge. Why don't you do the beer of the week for us?
So just like my personal beer of the week?
Yep, go ahead.
I think, let me take a look here. All right, well, my personal beer of the week is probably this one right here. So this is the Sweetwater Brewing Company from Atlanta, Georgia. It's called 420 strain G13 IPA. So it's a New England IPA. And if you're not familiar with the New England IPA, basically it's an IPA that's got a shitload of hops and smells super, super like aromatic, but it's not super bitter. And that's why they're super popular, because most people that you talk to say, oh, I don't like IPAs. I'm like, well, you don't like most IPAs. This IPA or this brand of IPA, or I guess style, tends to be very, very hoppy. Like it's like grassy and all these things, but it's not super bitter. This, as the name suggests, tastes like weed smells. And it's pretty good. I actually really, really like it. I don't buy beers again, like twice. I almost always buy a new beer unless I'm having like a party or something. I want to make sure I buy something I know I like and everybody else will like. I bought this beer 3 times now. And then I also went to like this place where I had 2 free beers. Like I get to drink 2 free beers, like a work event. And I always, especially in that case, like if I don't like it, who cares? I didn't pay for it. I always get 2 different beers. This beer was on tap and I got it twice, which is super weird. If you know me, that's like, did you forget what you got? Yeah. So Sweetwater Brewing, Atlanta, Georgia, 420 strain G13. If you find it, buy it. It's delicious. If you don't like the way weed smells, then maybe don't.
There you have it. There you have it, fellas.
You say what, Travis?
Can you find that at most liquor stores, or only like certain?
Yeah, I mean, I found it. I mean, I just found it like I don't go to a liquor store that's got like anything crazy. I just go to a Big Red. So they've had it there every time I've been the last month.
All right.
But yeah, should be able to find it.
Well, anyways, thanks again, Ridge, and you're on.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime. Later, guys.
And then there were 2.
Just like the old wrestling room days, just you and me.
Oh, man. The Iranian.
Get your hook.
First practice headlock.
Speaking of body locks, what we got in UFC this week?
So we got UFC 235. Probably the biggest card to date. We got John Jones versus Anthony Smith. We all know John Jones came back earlier this year. He came back, won his belt back. He's been tested multiple times for PEDs, and he's been passing. And the guy he's going up against is Anthony Smith, which I think he's a hell of a fighter. He moved up from middleweight, I believe, to light heavyweight, and he's been on a 4-fight streak, winning streak right now, and I think it's a healthier weight for him. He's not cutting a bunch of weight. And I guess he was cutting about 10 to 12-hour sessions of water weight the day before just to make weight, and that's not healthy. Obviously, me and you both know that.
All right.
So, with that being said, Anthony Smith is a fighter. I think he goes after it, and I don't think he's going to back down to John Jones. So I believe this is going to be a really good fight. But I mean, John Jones is John Jones for a reason. I mean, he's a light heavyweight champ for the reason, and he's considered one of the best for a reason. So Smith definitely has a large task at hand, but at the same time, I think there's a chance he might catch him. I mean, who doesn't like upsets, you know? So.
Oh yeah, I'm always one to root for the underdog. You know what I mean? Favorite movie's a Cinderella Man, so I'm all about the underdog story.
Now, next we got the co-main event for the welterweight championship for the UFC, and it is Tyron Woodley versus Kamaru Usman. And Woodley, if you don't know, he's actually from St. Louis. He has his own gym, and he has a connection with one of the head coach here at SIUE. So some of the guys know him and have been around him and wrestled with him a little bit. And I think all this hype, I think UFC tries day in and day out, tries to get Tyron Woodley out, because I don't think Dana White likes Woodley that much. And for some reason, I don't know why, he's been one of their best champions and best respected champions, and he's fought every guy they've ever put in front of him and defeated him. And I think he'll get it done again. I know Usman's a pretty hard, tough guy to face. He's kind of like Woodley, but Woodley's basically better at everything that he does, in my opinion. And not just being a bias, because I obviously know Woodley, but at the same time, I think overall, I don't think Usman has a shot. And what's funny is that the third fight that's on this card is Ben Askren versus Robbie Lawler. And Ben Askren and Tyron Woodley used to wrestle together at Mizzou with Jeremy Spates, our head coach at SIUE. And this is the first time they're on the same fight card since the beginning. They first fought at a small promotion together as their first starts. And now that Ben Askren finally got into the UFC, he's 18-0. He used to be the Bellator champion. He used to be the one championship over there in Asia champion. And now he came over here via trade with Demetrius Johnson. The UFC traded Demetrius Johnson to the one championship for Ben Askren to come over to the UFC, which that's never been done before. That's the first MMA trade of all time. I mean, that's just unheard of.
I remember that.
And so it's pretty awesome to see two former college wrestlers competing on the same card, one fighting after the other. And Ben Askren is Woodley's wrestling coach. So whenever Woodley fought, Ben Askren has been in his corner. And so it's going to be pretty awesome to see. And as far as the fight for Ben Askren, I think out of all the guys they could have matched him up with, the first fight that he's fought in 2 years, because he kind of like semi-retired in 2017. So for him to go against Robbie Lawler, it's like one of the scariest matchups he could have came back to, because Robbie Lawler can throw and he has some sort of wrestling, but it's not Ben Askren wrestling. If Ben Askren gets his hands around you and be able to body lock you, you're going to get taken down to the canvas. And that's all that Ben Askren does, but it only takes one shot. So if Robbie Lawler lands a shot, I know he can hit hard. And Ben Askren has been out of the fight game for, a year and a half. So, you never know, but I'm really, really hoping that Ben Askren wins, because he's been out of the UFC for all these years. He could have been proven that he's been one of the best, and so hopefully he gets this time to prove that. And which is funny, because he's the same weight as Woodley, but they said that they would never fight each other. So I think he goes in there and gets a hold of Lawler, takes him down. I think the wrestling is going to be too much for him, and it'll either be a TKO from him ground and pounding him, and the ref will stop it, or it'll go to a decision to Ben Askren.
Is Coach Spade's gonna go watch?
No, I don't think Coach Spade's going to watch, especially since he sent me a text message asking if I wanted to come over and watch it with him.
There you have it, folks.
So
It is better.
We're in the middle of the wrestling season right here for college wrestling. So yeah. I don't think he has especially being a head coach, I don't think he has the time to go out there to Las Vegas and watch the fight. I'm sure he would love to, but he's got other priorities, especially when we got the MAC championships coming up March 8th and 9th. So
heck yeah.
But other than that, this just alone, those three fights would have made this card. But you also got Cody Garbrandt, you got Zabit, you got Jeremy Stevens, you have Holly Holm, and like I said, I think this card's going to be awesome. If you don't watch UFC or or don't usually tune into fights like this, I think you should definitely take a chance and take a shot at this one, because I think you're going to be highly entertained and it's going to be a lot of fun watching.
Oh yeah, heck yeah, man.
Are you going to tune into it, maybe?
I got my wife's birthday this weekend, so you know,
Yeah.
Go out
Well, there it is, folks. We know he ain't watching it.
I watched the fight weekly like we used to back in the day, since we were probably in early 20s.
Yeah. You gotta get back into it, man. That you always gotta watch the wrestlers dominate in the UFC.
Yeah, I know. I miss it.
So
what we got next? Baseball?
Yeah, go ahead.
I seen today Nolan Arenado got a contract extension with the Colorado Rockies for $260 million for 8 years, and he has a 3-year option. And
what's that roughly around a year?
Well, I know he's getting $26 million this year.
That's 32.5.
Yeah, on top of the $26 million he's getting this year. But yeah, he'll be. Now he has the biggest contract for baseball player making salary per year, and so we just had the Machado deal for $300 for 10 years last week. This week, Arenado, and talks are on the table that Harper is getting multiple offers now for $300 million. So
that's crazy. It's crazy. The other thing is that it's in my opinion, it's ridiculous how much these guys are getting paid nowadays. I mean, not just in baseball, but just overall. I mean, obviously boxing's always been like that, but man, these guys, the 30 million plus now a year.
Yeah, I know. People
out there kind of risk their lives every day, day in, day out, and they don't get anything paid for it. So, I mean, it's just I see why, because obviously they're the money maker.
I agree. I think the people in the service should get a lot more money than they do, but unfortunately, it's how it is. Hopefully, one day they
Yeah, I know.
No, it's never gonna be even out. That's for sure. I mean, these athletes are get more and more money. I think pretty soon. I think Trout. I think we're gonna see him get like a $500 million contract. And so, I mean, it's going to keep going up. I think by the time we're dead, someone's going to be almost getting $1 billion contract.
Yeah.
But
well, that's Logan Taylor, member of the Cold Brew and the Crew. Signing off, Travis Marley.
Take it easy, guys. Have a good week.
Have a good week, guys.